My name is Katherine Johnson. I was a career woman working for a certain company. My husband, Michael, quit his job to become a stay-at-home husband when we got married. I had been with my current company since graduating from university. The decision for me to work and for Michael to manage the household was made due to his interests and our family situation. Michael was always good at cooking and doing housework, even when we were dating. Since becoming a stay-at-home husband, he fully utilized these skills. After the birth of our daughter, Sophie, he became even more proactive in parenting and household duties. Of course, I would also spend time with my daughter when I was home, but I came to realize that Michael's domestic skills far surpassed mine. Both Michael's and my parents understood the circumstances of our work and Michael's personality well, and they were supportive of his decision to become a stay-at-home husband. Both our families would often visit us at home, and after Sophie's birth, they frequently checked in on us, creating a very positive home environment. "Hi, honey, you're back. Mommy, you're home." I was always greeted by our daughter, Sophie, and Michael, who prepared the warm meal for us. This comforting home was my motivation to keep pushing forward. As the sole breadwinner, I was feeling pressure to work even harder. However, there was a rather troublesome person among my superiors at work. The department I was working for mainly handled administrative tasks, so there were lots of women working there. "Good morning, Catherine." My colleague, Emily, would greet me as she sat down next to me. Emily and I had known each other since we joined the company, and she had just returned from maternity leave. Our company was a major player in the industry, with excellent employee benefits, creating a comfortable and fulfilling work environment. Emily was able to take maternity leave without any issues. The queen bee is still sitting at that desk, isn't she? Returning to work and getting back into the groove, Emily looked towards the back of our office and said that with a sigh. Even in the good workplaces, if there were many women, there would always be a so-called a queen bee in a leadership position. And our department was no exception. This queen bee, Barbara, whom we secretly called Ms. Gossip, was the source of my troubles. Even when Emily went on maternity leave, Ms. Gossip would loudly say things like, "Young people these days are so weak, taking maternity leave so easily." During breaks or when we had a moment to chat, she would invariably boast about her husband. Ms. Gossip's husband, an executive at a large corporation, was often the topic of her endless conversations about his greatness and achievements, even when no one asked. It was like the fox borrowing the tiger's might. Emily and other colleagues were tired of Ms. Gossip's bragging and usually just tuned out. When Ms. Gossip finally left, Emily would breathe a sigh of relief, saying, "Finally, we're free." Although I had to deal with Ms. Gossip's mood swings, the work environment was so comfortable that I tried my best not to offend her. Being one of the tenured employees, I naturally had many opportunities to assist and interact with Ms. Gossip. Ms. Gossip, due to her husband's influence, would dine at upscale restaurants near the office every day. If our lunch times coincided with one another's, she would invite me to join her. I couldn't refuse due to work relations, but then I would have to endure endless bragging about her husband. It was like torture. At first, I tolerated it because the meals served at those restaurants were so delicious. However, over the time, I grew tired of listening to her. Not only would she brag about her husband, but also talk about her personal views and values on certain things, which were becoming unbearably painful to listen to. She would tell me that a man's job was to earn money, that a man's worth was measured by how much money he would make. She would always boast about marrying her husband for money so she could live a luxurious life for the rest of her life. Just listening to what she said was utterly tiresome. Although I managed to maintain a decent relationship with Ms. Gossip, I couldn't deny that I felt stressed. In fact, I had been stressed out. The reason was probably because I disliked her constant nagging. Yet, I had to suck it up, thinking of Michael, cooking dinner and waiting for me to come home, and our daughter Sophie. As long as I didn't upset her, my work was fulfilling, and the work environment was good. But then, an incident occurred. In our department, it would get very busy at certain times of the year. Despite the fact that I was just an administrative assistant, the amount of work and the number of meetings increased. And I would often find myself bustling around not just with my tasks, but also assisting Ms. Gossip. Although she was a superior, she couldn't even do her jobs properly. She would often forget to check her emails. and she wouldn't even know how to prepare documents for the meetings. Yet she would arrogantly tell us what to do. She also had the tendency to become hysterical, especially when it was busy. When I first joined the company, all of us were often at the mercy of her unreasonable demands and mood swings, which even led some to quit their jobs. However, since I took the lead in assisting her, and with the help of Emily and other colleagues working behind the scenes, we were able to get the job done reasonably well. But that day, I felt unwell since I woke up in the morning. Though I felt so weak that I wanted to take a day off, I had some work that needed to be done, so I took some tablets and went to the office. Michael was worried and suggested I take a rest, but I assured him I was fine and went to work. By afternoon, my condition worsened significantly. I felt like the walls of darkness enveloping me, overwhelmed by a headache and fatigue, and I collapsed over my desk. Startled by my sudden collapse, Emily rushed to call an ambulance, but I told her it was okay, and asked her to call my husband instead. Emily, knowing my husband's situation, readily agreed, but unfortunately, Ms. Gossip overheard our conversation. Emily helped me to the visitor's sofa, and used my phone to call Michael. After drinking some water, I started feeling a little bit better. I felt guilty for troubling Michael, who advised me to stay home. I was thinking I shouldn't have come to work that day when Ms. Gossip approached me, timing it perfectly. She asked, "Isn't your husband supposed to be at work?" As I struggled with how to explain, she said with a smirk, "Your husband is a stay-at-home dad, isn't he, Catherine?" I had a bad feeling and tried to explain about my husband's situation, but in that moment, I could sense a change in her gaze. I knew then, that was the look of someone who wouldn't listen, no matter what I said. Once Ms. Gossip decided on something, it would be hard to get her to see things from a different perspective. I'd been on the receiving end of that look quite a few times in the past, always ending up backing down. And there it was again, that same look. Ms. Gossip said, "I understand," and nonchalantly returned to her seat. Emily, returning to where I was, complained, not a word of sympathy from her, but that wasn't what I was worried about. Soon after, Michael called me to say he had arrived to pick me up. I had a bad feeling again and asked him to wait downstairs, but Michael insisted, "You have a fever, I'll come up to your floor," and came up to where I was. Normally, I would appreciate his kindness, but at that time it only intensified my anxiety. I was hoping that nobody in our busy department would notice his arrival, but Ms. Gossip saw him walking towards our office. As soon as Michael, wearing a visitor's badge, entered the office, Ms. Gossip stood up from her seat. Seeing Michael grabbing my work bag and coat, Ms. Gossip hurled unbelievable words at him. "Are you Catherine's husband? Aren't you ashamed to be a stay-at-home dad? Making your wife work until she collapses from a fever, unbelievable." My mind was slow to process her words due to the fever. Everyone in the office, including Emily, other female employees, and a few male colleagues, was speechless. Ms. Gossip was blatantly harassing Michael, who wasn't working. She loudly criticized him, saying it was pathetic for a man to stay home and take care of the house. My bad premonition had come true. I was shaking with quiet rage. After all, the reason why I had to work so hard was partly due to Ms. Gossip's negligence in her work. She acted all high and mighty, but I was the one diligently preparing the documents and materials for meetings. Why was Michael subjected to such harassment when he was just worried and came to pick me up? I thought Ms. Gossip was incredibly rude to him. To her sarcasm, Michael replied, "I'm good at cooking and find housework easy, so being a stay-at-home dad suits me. Plus, I actually enjoy managing the household budget." He said this with a smile. In fact, Michael was great at cooking, was a good parent, and was helpful with housework and childcare. He wasn't even feeling bad about being a stay-at-home dad, and confidently stood up to Ms. Gossip. To his response, Ms. Gossip frowned unhappily and said, "Just take your wife home," throwing a parting shot before returning to her seat. Michael quickly gathered my things and supported me as I was staggering. "Michael, I'm sorry. I've put you through this unpleasant situation." I was completely exhausted from the fever and Ms. Gossip's harassment. In the elevator, feeling angry at Ms. Gossip and sorry for Michael, I almost cried. Sensing this, Michael silently and kindly supported my shoulder. Soon after that, he took me to the hospital, and I was diagnosed with burnout. Lately, I've been doing Ms. Gossip's work along with my own, which probably led to this exhaustion. I told my boss, David, about my results from the hospital and was granted a few days of paid sick leave to rest. I wondered if it was really okay to take such a long break during our busy time of the year. However, after receiving messages from Emily saying, "Don't worry, just rest," I decided to rest for a few days. I was concerned that I hadn't heard anything from Ms. Gossip. But during the unexpected week off, I thoroughly enjoyed spending quality time with Michael and our daughter Sophie. Visiting Michael's parents, going to the park with Sophie, and shopping together as a family, I completely forgot the anger I had towards Ms. Gossip. Fully enjoyed the time off. A week later, I returned to work. I was checking on the backlog of tasks when Ms. Gossip suddenly invited me to dinner over the weekend. Apparently, her husband had secured a reservation at a newly opened popular upscale restaurant. She planned to take a few colleagues along, saying it was also to celebrate my recovery. "You should bring your husband along," Ms. Gossip suggested. Remembering how she treated Michael, I casually declined the suggestion. Ms. Gossip looked disappointed, like a little child who lost a toy, and reluctantly said, "All right then." At that moment, the anger I had forgotten started to resurface. She said she would let me know the name and the location of the restaurant on the day, and then return to her seat. Talking about it with Emily, we both agreed that Ms. Gossip probably wanted to surprise us and show us how amazing she was. When I told Michael about it at home, he didn't show any displeasure and encouraged me to go. I had mixed feelings. I was feeling happy that he didn't seem to be annoyed, but at the same time, I was disappointed that he wouldn't stop me from going. That week was the end of our busy season, and I spent every day clearing the piled-up work and assisting Ms. Gossip. Then, the weekend arrived, and it was the day we were going for dinner together. Without knowing the restaurant's name, all of us including Emily and myself were led by a triumphant Ms. Gossip out of the office. When we arrived at the restaurant, Emily and I were struck with disbelief. The other colleagues seemed surprised too, but for different reasons. Isn't it amazing? It's such a popular restaurant you won't be able to get a reservation easily. But my husband managed to get one. "Let's go inside," Ms. Gossip boasted, satisfied to see what she thought was my astonishment, and headed into the restaurant. The bewildered colleagues followed Ms. Gossip, and Emily and I, snapping out of our shock, followed last. The atmosphere of the restaurant was wonderful, and the service by the waiters was impeccable. Ms. Gossip had reserved a private room for us, and the course meals seemed pre-selected, as dishes were served the moment we sat down. Initially nervous, my colleagues began to relax, thoroughly enjoying the exquisite dinner. The food was delicious, and the service was excellent. But I was restless. Emily seemed to feel the same, occasionally glancing my way, but I deliberately said nothing. As the course meal was winding down, with only dessert and drinks left to be served, the conversation up to that point had been dominated by Ms. Gossip bragging about her husband. She kept saying how her husband managed to reserve such a fabulous restaurant. Every now and then, she demeaned my husband for being a stay-at-home dad. Her comments were harsh and cruel. Talking about husbands who reluctantly do housework, dependent on their wives. Suggesting that such men, being lazy and reliant on women, were probably cheating on their wives. She made such baseless accusations and snickered at me. Seeing her smug face, I felt anger boiling up inside me. Emily seemed to have reached her limit too, and we were about to leave early to avoid causing a scene when something unexpected happened. "Thank you very much for visiting our restaurant today," said the owner, Richard, in a suit appearing from the back of the restaurant. Ms. Gossip was dumbfounded when Richard came into the private room and asked, "Did our chef cause any inconvenience?" This left my colleagues, except Emily and me, in utter astonishment. Emily and I were surprised by Richard's appearance for a different reason. The reason I was antsy all evening was that I knew this place very well. In fact, I had been invited here before it even opened. The owner, Richard, who appeared from the back, was Michael's older brother. Emily, whose maiden name was Parker, now shared my surname, Johnson. Emily is Richard's wife and, consequently, the sister-in-law of Michael. Who was the head chef of this upscale restaurant? Michael used to work as a chef at a very famous French restaurant. He and his brother decided to venture into the restaurant business, which was their long-held dream, and opened that restaurant with the money they had accumulated over the years. With Richard in charge of management and Michael responsible for cooking. I met Michael through Emily, who was going out with Richard at the time, and we eventually got married. I also had a positive family relationship with Emily, and when she gave birth, I helped her. Drawing on my own experiences from the time Sophie was born. Michael and Richard had already saved enough money to open a restaurant even before we married. But Michael wanted to refine his cooking techniques to his satisfaction. So, after our marriage, he left the French restaurant, where he was training, to become a full-time stay-at-home dad, focusing on perfecting his culinary skills. Finally, he was satisfied with his recipes, and the brothers opened the restaurant. Having supported them over the years, both Emily and I were invited to the restaurant pre-opening event, so we knew about this place very well. After opening, the restaurant quickly became famous, featured in magazines and TV shows, and turned into a well-sought-after restaurant with hard-to-get reservations. The reason why Richard, the owner and Emily's husband, came to our private room was simple. Ms. Gossip's loud voice had carried all the way to the owner's room, and Richard heard Michael's name was mentioned in the conversation. Richard didn't even know we were at the restaurant and seemed a bit surprised to see us when he entered the room. But his expression also held a quiet anger. Like the kind-hearted Michael, his brother was also a gentle person. However, he always said, "I hate it most when someone belittles my little brother." So, he must have been quite upset by Ms. Gossip's insulting remarks. "Forgive me, but the Michael you call a henpecked husband is the head chef of this restaurant and a treasure to us. He is not the person you describe. He is honest and takes pride in his work as a chef. The dishes you just enjoyed were developed by him over the years. Please understand his personality and the dedication and effort he puts into his work." We had to restrain our emotions, wanting to cheer, "Yes. Great." Perhaps sensing our feelings, Richard continued to speak highly of Michael as a chef and as a person. Glancing at a completely knocked-out Ms. Gossip, Richard looked around at all of us at the table. "Sorry for the disturbance. As an apology, please enjoy an additional dessert on the house," he said before leaving the room. As he exited, Richard caught our eyes and gave a slight smile before leaving. It felt like a complete victory. All of us, including Ms. Gossip with a red face, went silent after witnessing everything. Unable to bear the situation, Ms. Gossip quickly paid the bill and left the restaurant. The dessert served after she left was a popular shortcake, which Emily and I enjoyed very much. It was delicious. A few days later, with Michael working full-time as the head chef, I quit my job to become a full-time homemaker. I received words of gratitude and appreciation from my colleagues, and I still keep in touch with them, meeting for coffee in my free time. From what I hear from Emily, who took over my position at the company, Ms. Gossip's husband found out about that day's events. Moreover, he discovered she had been misusing his earnings, leading to him losing patience and divorcing her. Now, she claims she's married to her job, but without me as her assistant, her reputation at the company has plummeted. Well, it's a case of reaping what she sowed. I'm happy with my life, spending quality time with my beloved child. Once I find more time between parenting and housework, I plan to help out at Michael's restaurant,